I think it's time
Oh
that we go
boy,
back to an older part of this show that we haven't
I
done
know
in
where
quite
we're
some
going, I
time.
think.
It's time for Mike
Oh,
Berger Psychology Corner. Hello, everyone, and
oh my
welcome
god.
to the Psychology Corner. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Screened In podcast. Here at the Screened In podcast, we watch anything that's on our screens. That includes movies, TV, anime, video games. If it's on a screen, we're probably talking about it. My name is Mike Berger. On this episode of the Screened In podcast, we ruin our childhoods by going behind the curtain and realizing that the real Wizard of Oz was a middle aged fat guy asking for massages. We try not to cry into our pillows after we watched Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV, while hoping and praying that nothing sinister was ever going on with the TV show SpongeBob. Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by my esteemed, like broccoli, co-host John Arteglair. Welcome, John.
Hello. The good thing with that joke, never gonna get old, just like broccoli. Uh,
I kept
yeah,
saying themed for like the last year,
yeah,
and now the
it's
like
all
broccoli part
culminated to
is
this.
yeah.
Uh, it's, ooh, I think you nailed it in that intro. This really does dampen a lot of shows from my past, but
Yeah.
if you don't know what Quiet on the Set is, I mean, right now I feel like this is like the buzz TV show right now. I feel like this is everywhere kind of. But it's looking back at the 90s and 2000s Nickelodeon kind of era that is heavily influenced by a Mr. Dan Schneider. Oh, am I boring you, Burger? You're going in your drawer over there. um, but it's Dan Schneider. He's created or directed like all that. iCarly. Um, was he Keenan and Kel too, or did he just work with Keenan? But
Um I think he worked with I think maybe. I know
uh,
he was involved with all that, which
yeah.
they were both on.
But any of like the live action kind of Nickelodeon shows, Dan Snyder had his hand in, and this is kind of giving a look back from the perspective of the child actors that were involved. And ooh, it was not a good environment. Like, it
It doesn't
really
paint a
pulls the
pretty
curtain
picture.
back. No, not at all. Was this the first you had heard about Dan Snyder, or did you kind of already know some of these things?
I already knew some of these things
Okay.
that were being said about Dan Snyder. Obviously not to this level because nobody had anything packaged to this level like this show had.
Yeah.
I believe. Like they really painted a clear picture because I'll say that like John's talking about a significant portion of this show, but another significant half of this show is that there were 2 actual pedophiles that were
Yeah.
working on these shows, that one of which, um, sexually assaulted, Drake Bell,
Yeah.
um, many, many times
Yeah,
through
that's kind
throughout the
of
course.
that was like seems like the big draw. That's how I first heard about this show, where
It's,
people talking about Drake Bell finally talking about this.
it's this argument that I think, like, it's important to talk about Dan Schneider because even though Dan Schneider hadn't, uh, done what was done to Drake Bell, is the argument is that the culture that is created on
Mhm.
these sets allows these types of things to happen and
Yeah, he set up the environment.
doesn't really put up a lot of safeguards for, children that are involved in the shooting of these TV shows.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, since we brought it up, maybe we'll start with the Drake Bell stuff and then kinda almost work backwards a little bit. But, that's kind of I had no idea that until, like, halfway through watching the episode, I was like, "Oh," I'm like, "Okay," like, I thought maybe this was the first time Drake Bell publicly talked about it, but this is, like, the first time people are finding out that this happened to Drake Bell, and I mean, he was one of the biggest shows on Nickelodeon, Drake and Josh,
Yeah,
and I'm like, what a different time to where this could happen to one of your biggest stars, and he's successfully able to kinda keep this under wraps for what, 15 years or something like that?
yeah.
That's there's no way that would
Even
happen
went to
nowadays.
court and, like,
Yeah,
all of this, like, stuff happened. Like, and even to the point where he details that when they're in the courtroom, that this guy who had done this to him has tons and tons and
yeah,
tons of people behind him and support behind him in the industry. And when they actually like appealed the court like for this TV show to release the letters of support that were
yeah.
given for that, a lot of people were quite upset with the names that came through.
Very
And this
weird
is
names to come through too, like,
yeah, well
very weird ones.
this particular guy, it is interesting because this particular guy, had worked even going as far back with, like, a young Leonardo
Mhm.
DiCaprio,
Yep.
right? And when you think about it that way, it's like, "Oh, we got like, this guy was working with, like, Gen Xers when they were kids." You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
this goes far back, and the question remains sometimes I think about this occasionally, when I look at, like, Jennifer Aniston, I look at Leonardo DiCaprio, and I look at these other people, and I think to myself, "There's someone there's someone famous that we don't know has gone through hell and
Oh,
back."
and, like, it's always gonna be just such a tough subject. I mean, watching Drake Bell talk about it,
That was
kinda
rough.
gives just kind of like I've never really talked about this outside of therapy. I don't know what to really say. And, like, it's he puts it, like, in a really terrible way. He's just like, think about, like, the worst things you could do to, like, sexually assault somebody, and he's like, "That's
Mhm.
just picture that. That's what happened. Just there you go."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh my god."
You know who really broke my heart, though? I mean, Drake for sure, but, like, his dad. When his dad
Ooh,
talked about it, that was hard because his dad, like, knew and, like,
yeah,
said multiple things at, like, multiple different times, and even had said to his ex-wife at the time when Drake had decided, like, "I don't want you to be my manager anymore," to his dad, um, and his dad knowing what that meant, he said to his ex-wife, "Whatever you do, don't let that guy anywhere near my kid.
yeah,
Like,
don't
whatever
let them
you
be
do,
alone. He
don't let
something's
them be."
wrong.
Yep, and that guy, of course, was very smart and manipulative, and he found a way to
Yeah.
make it happen.
That's the
Um
weird like, that's such a rough part of it is it wasn't just like it didn't just happen. Like, this guy wormed his way
Mm.
into his life. I think his Brian it's Brian Peck, I believe is the name, right? Um,
Is
'cause
it?
yeah,
Yeah, Brian is the first name. Is it
'cause
Peck?
yeah,
Because
he
that I'm confusing it with Josh Peck.
yeah, it's the same last name. Because
Same
during it, I
last
was
name,
like, "They're
okay.
not related, right?"
2 different
But,
people.
yeah, like, watching it, I was like, "Man," like, he really did kind of worm his way into being, like, best friends as a 40-something-year-old dude,
Mhm.
and then, implanted that thought of like, "Hey, don't have your dad be your manager, like, get him
Yeah.
out of there."
Well,
And
John,
then oof,
I think it's time
oh
that we go
boy,
back to an older, part of this show that we haven't
I
done
know
in
where
quite
we're
some
going, I
time.
think.
It's time
Oh,
or
la
Mike
la.
Berger's Psychology Corner. Hello, everyone, and
Oh my
welcome
god.
to the Psychology Corner. So, I was reading Malcolm Gladwell's book, How to Talk to Strangers, recently. And in that book, he details something called a truth bias that we all have. So, um, we all kind of are, but when we look at people, we have
Mhm.
this, we basically give the benefit of the doubt. So
Yeah.
even if we get an indication that something's off, the threshold for that is very, very strong.
Yeah.
So in other words, you really have to trigger our, like, our that truth bias. Like, you really have to do something significant for us to start to think, "Oh, there's something not right here."
Yeah.
And that dad's truth bias was triggered multiple times, into the point where, like, he really was like, "No, something's not right here." Right?
Yeah.
And but this guy managed, think about how many people, we all think that we are so good at spotting individuals who are dangerous, who are, don't mean us, you know, don't mean good toward us. We think we're so good at spotting those individuals, but in reality, we're not very good at it at
No.
all. It takes a lot for that to, and think about how many people worked with this guy over
Yeah.
the years, and
Um,
enough people to also write letters
yeah.
to
In
in
support.
support of him.
I mean, the dad brings it
Wow.
up to somebody, like, pretty early on, like, he notices, like, he's a little touchy-feely, not in a sexual way, but just in a kind of like, "Drake's 13, let's not be, like, putting your hand on his shoulder all the time, bud."
Yeah.
And he kinda
He
brings it
was
up.
like he was, like, dressing him or something, and that he's like, "He
Oh,
can put his
yeah.
own shirt on. Like, you
Yeah.
don't need to be doing that."
Yeah, that's when it, like, really started to ramp up too. He
Right.
was like, "Okay, hold on a minute, this is even worse
Mhm.
now." And yeah, he brought it up to some people who worked with him, and they blew it off right away. They were like, "No, no, 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 Brian's cool, like, oh, uh, like, he it's fine, don't worry about it." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, like, oh, man." But, I mean, that's kind of the big lead up of this show, is that, but, like, there is a lot of stuff along the way that this show covers that, like, God, like, all the I don't even know where to start, like, with some of the other stuff this show covers, like, um, the one thing that came to mind, that's, like, kinda early on is they're talking to some of these, actors that I guess were on kind of, like, the second resurgence of, like, all that. So,
Mm.
past my time, I think, because I didn't really remember them. It wasn't like the Keenan Thompson days, but
Yeah, I was a first wave of all that as well.
yeah.
I, like, barely recognized the people who were in the second wave of all that, which also
Mhm.
confuses me, right, John? Because, like, I'm like, "How do I know the first cast of all that?" And then I missed the second, but then I still watched Nickelodeon. Like, what time of my life how did we miss that?
I think maybe it's just like, I don't know, maybe watching it, you were kinda like, "Oh, this is a little too childish," or something, like, I don't know if maybe we were just a
Was it,
little
like,
bit
I think I'm starting to wonder, though, you had an older sister. How much older is your sister than you?
6 years.
'Kay. And then I had, like, I'm an only child, but when I would go over to Dan's house, Jess and Justine are significant, Jess is older than me, not
Yeah.
significantly, 3 years older, 4 years older, and that might be enough for you and I to have, like, watched the original All That, but then, I don't know, for whatever reason, we didn't watch the second. I
Yeah.
find that strange, because then all these other shows that were on Nick, I do remember. So, like, what
Yeah.
happened?
It looks like the pilot of all that was released, um, late 1994. So I was definitely I was
Oh, so I was like
4 years
5,
old.
6 years old.
Yeah. I was gonna say, "Wait a minute, Bert." But yeah, so I was young when that came out, so I was probably catching that's weird too, that's even weirder that I didn't watch the second wave of all that. But,
It's weird. It's real strange. I don't know.
yeah, but one of the first things they're talking about is, like, they had these, like, truth or dare segments, and
Yo, when I saw that and I thought to myself, I kind of remember these, but I didn't even think to myself back then because you just, as a kid, I think people have to understand as a kid, you just accept things and you
Mhm.
just think to yourself, oh, the adults in the room know better than I do. So if
I
they tell me it's okay or if they tell me it's safe, then I'm just going to go ahead and do it.
and I think watching these shows as a kid, you're not even thinking of the adults. Like,
Not at
you're
all.
thinking of these kids are just having fun,
Right.
and so, like, the one kid who got, like, covered in peanut butter and then dogs came and licked it off his body. As a kid, you look at that and your thought is just like, "Oh, that's so gross. Good thing that's not me."
Yeah.
But you're not realizing that there's a fucking production team and writers who came up with all this, and these are 12-year-olds getting told, "Hey, you gotta go do this."
I
Like,
just want to ask a question too. Like, whose job was it to slather him in peanut butter? Or like, who's handling the dogs where they're like, okay, dog handler. So what the dogs are going to do is they're going to lick the peanut butter off of this young boy's body. I'm sorry.
yeah.
What?
Well, that's like like, that's the thing in the last, like, 20 so years, the world has changed a lot. Like,
Yeah,
you
that's
probably would
so
not
right.
do that this like, there's also things have gotten more, edgy or raunchy since then too,
True.
but looking back at this stuff, I feel like this kind of thing would not really fly. I mean,
No.
especially the other big one with the kids is all the innuendos and stuff that aren't even
And there's a
innuendos.
lot of examples, like, you can't even, like, argue that much, like, "Oh, it's just 1 or 2 things here and there."
No.
No, they just had example after example after example, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, man."
Like, they had, like, 3 or 4 different, like, cum shot jokes that they covered
Wow.
that
Yeah.
were, like, these young girls, like, somehow finding an excuse to get, like, sprayed with something in the face in a very suggestive way, and I'm like, once again, as a kid, you don't think about it at all, but now, like, looking back, you're like, "Yes, somebody wrote that scene
Mhm.
for a 12-year-old girl." Like, that's or, maybe whatever, I keep saying 12, I have no idea how old they were, it could've been 15, 16, either it doesn't matter. That's where the whole Dan Schneider part of it comes in. He was kinda responsible for all that kinda stuff, like, he might
Yeah.
not have been I mean, who knows? Like,
Mm.
he seemed to be a little creepy with some of the girls, but, he was very odd in that sense, like, he would make very adult jokes with these kids that I said, "How did that air? Like, how did any of it
Yeah.
air?"
Yeah, he's not he doesn't really, like he's more of, like, what happens when an immature man child gets control and just
Yeah.
decides, "These are the I want massages. I
Mhm.
want you to say that same joke, but, in the writer's room, but I want you to pretend like you're being sodomized while you say it." Like,
Yeah.
what? But the thing is now, like so what other people don't know excuse me, hold on 1 second.
Oh, there we go.
Yes, I am a mental health professional, but what many people probably don't know is that I also do a lot of the trainings, and one of the trainings I do is in workplace violence, and that's part of harassment. So, the thing is, when what can happen in a work environment is that a work environment can so easily become toxic when people decide to ignore the toxic behavior.
Yeah.
So, like, even if somebody's doing something like, making people uncomfortable by saying a sexual joke or doing this or that, if they're doing it in front of you, there's a good chance they're doing it in front of somebody else too. And
Mhm.
so if you don't go and report that, or if you don't speak up and say that you're uncomfortable with it to that person, then it can quite easily become get away from, uh, everybody and become a toxic work environment. Before you know it, you're losing good people.
Yeah.
People quit because they don't wanna be there anymore.
And it seems like
Um,
that kinda is what happened with a
yeah,
few people, or he would make it so hostile to kinda force them out. That
and
like you
that's the
said.
thing I think too is, like, these environments, the threshold for what you can take in these environments is so high because, like, for some of these writers, it's like their very first paying gig,
Yeah.
right? Like, they're like, "I'm never gonna get this chance again, so I just have to, like, take this
Yep.
and just that's it. Like, I
It's
don't have a
hazing
choice."
pretty much,
What's that?
and it's like hazing.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
to get in, you have to take it.
Yep.
But, yeah, like, in, like, I think the first episode, there's 2 women who it was their kind of their first break into a writing gig, and it's wild because they were made to share a salary,
That was wild,
which,
yeah.
like, that's the other thing. It seems like he has a pretty big history of kind of treating women differently in the workplace, kind of just being very, I don't know, uncomfy around women and
Yeah.
making them feel that way.
That
Like
and
you
then
said.
and if anybody, like, has any objections, to the statement of, like, he was of the thing you just said about the salaries, when she talked about the season 2, when she came back and they said, "We're only gonna pay you for 11 weeks, but you're working 22." And then, like, the guy came in, a new guy came in, 1st year on the job, full
Yep,
salary.
yep,
And it's like, "Okay, well, that's pretty egregious." There's
yeah.
nothing like, he's got no experience, and, like, it's
Like, at
ridiculous.
that point, it seems like like, he's making it like, "You're either gonna, work for me and be dirt, and who
Mhm.
cares, or you can leave. It doesn't matter." Like, to him, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Like, he's getting what he wants either way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like you said too, you mentioned, like, "Oh, say that joke again," like you're being, like, sodomized or whatever. It, he seemed to do that a lot, like, a lot of, like, "Oh, do this degrading thing because I think it's funny."
Yeah.
And everyone has to go along with it because he's the boss. Like, at that
Rub
time,
sauce.
he was making every top show for Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
Unless
One
something
one after another.
and with how things were back then, like, unless something really bad happened, he wasn't going anywhere. He's
Right.
he's implanted there. He's not getting fired, he's not getting let go. Even after all this, he was never let go. It was kinda one of those
Oh, yeah.
mutually parted ways type thing.
They settled a lawsuit about Dan,
Yeah.
and it, like, never went anywhere to the public. She got money, and she knew too, like, "I'm never gonna work in this field again because
Yep.
of this lawsuit. Like, nobody's gonna touch me."
Yeah.
But I
Oh,
tell you
but
what, it's fucking worth it.
yeah, but Brian Peck will. He like, I
Oh,
isn't that cra he got hired by Disney or something, like, right after serving his sentence?
dude, I was like,
It's
"How?
yeah.
How?" Um, yeah, Disney hired him. That was
Ugh.
wild. To work on,
Um,
um, Zack and Cody, the
oh, yeah, The Sweet Life.
cruise ship one, whichever
Yeah.
one that was called.
It's The Sweet isn't it The Sweet Life with Zach and Cody?
Yeah, but I
The
thought there were 2 different names, or maybe there were 2 different
Oh,
because
is it
one was in
different?
a hotel and one was in a cruise
Yeah.
ship.
These are
Why do
definitely
I know that?
I don't know. I do too, but these were definitely past my time. Like,
Yeah.
I remember watching this, like, they go over, like, the Amanda Show, I remember that.
Mhm.
iCarly, I I think that's kinda where I was drifting off. Like, I remember that, I remember watching some of it, but I don't remember always watching that. Like, I think
I'm actually
maybe
surprised that Gibby, do you remember Gibby from iCarly?
yeah,
Yeah, I'm surprised he wasn't in this because, like, he I think tried to do some acting. I think he did, like, some, like, social media stuff, but ultimately just dropped it because he said his mental health was too,
ugh,
like, unstable, but, like, he has talked about this before on YouTube videos of, like, his own mental health, and, like, he was, like, kind of a little bit chubbier and would take
yeah.
his shirt off in iCarly all the time,
Oh,
and
yeah, that was, like, his thing.
yeah, and I think that stayed with him for a really long time, and, like, in college, people would be like, "Hey, it's Gibby, you take your shirt off, woo woo," like,
Yeah.
just people being stupid, and he's like, he felt like he couldn't escape it, so
I
opted
mean,
for not doing stuff at all.
I kinda thought about that watching this, like, when they're showing in the first few episodes, like, that All That cast, I'm like, "This is really tough for them." I mean, I this is gonna sound terrible, but, um, some of these people, they went through it, they had a rough time, but they at least like, they had that acting career, they made money or something, or they got these experiences later on in
Right.
life, something. Not saying that makes it better, I'm just saying
Mhm,
they at least had that limelight for a long time
mhm,
and were able to make a career out of it. Some of these other child actors, they didn't get that. They literally got messed up, got all
mhm,
the trauma, got, these weird standards or depression or all these issues and then have to just go live normal lives. Like you said, that Gibby is at college trying to just live a normal life. And it's like, nope, like you are that character now. Like, have fun. Like, these adults made you look like a fool at 14 years old, and now go have fun and deal with that in college. Like, that's got to be brutal. Because I want like how much does someone like that even make from these Nickelodeon shows? Like it that's I've always wondered that
good
because Dan
question.
Schneider made a ton of money
I mean, even when they let him go from Nickelodeon, dude made $7,000,000,
just to
like,
leave.
just to leave.
There was a Instagram reel about his house in, like, Beverly Hills, and it's like a 55 million dollar mansion. Like, it's a house that you would think a platinum recording artist would have. Think about all the residuals and royalties he has to be making. Those shows are still showing. Like, every so often, they still show iCarly or something like that, and they're streaming and stuff. He's probably still raking in money from everything, even while
Yeah.
being a piece of trash. The one thing I wanted to bring up, I mean, I like we always say this, but like I don't want to go over everything because I feel like this is a very good documentary to go watch.
Oh, you
Um,
should absolutely go watch this. It was very good, very well done.
the one person who really wasn't back on here is Jeanette McCurdy, from iCarly.
Who's released a book and,
Have you listened or read her book?
um, s my wife, listens to this podcast that and the name of it's escaping me. I'll put it in the show notes if I remember. But the podcast, what it does is they read new biographies that come out from well-known celebrities, and then
Okay.
they basically I think it's something called, like, "I read this so you don't have to," like,
Oh,
something
okay.
like that. Yeah, something like that.
Spark
So
Notes,
that's
the
the purpose
podcast.
of the podcast is, like, to read the book for you, and then they talk about it on the podcast.
Okay.
So I heard all of the details regurgitated from that podcast.
Okay.
Um,
Um,
it's
I would
significant.
100% recommend the audiobook. Uh,
Wow.
I
Read by her?
Yeah. So I
Wow.
remember iCarly, I remember watching some of it, and I just remember her character being, like, the cool, funny one and stuff
Yeah,
like
she
that,
was
like
she was always the one who I was like, "Oh, she's like the, like, tomboy one that every guy wants to be friends with, like, because she's so
Yeah,
funny.
she was like the super goofball. And so
Yeah.
when this book came out and like I had heard a little bit about what it was about in her life, I was like, "Whoa." I'm like, "Okay." And so that's kind of where I first started to hear about everything. But I would really recommend it cuz it covers all the mental health issues that this causes. And like her mother was like the classic kind of manipulative show mom who like really kind of thrust her into this,
Mhm.
and she just had it coming from all angles. And it's read by her, and hearing her experiences going through iCarly, then that Sam and Cat show, it's real. It's really it's a great listen, but it's not great what she went through and like all the stories she talks about, and like how she's still kind of going through stuff currently and everything. And
Yeah,
I even if you got some of those details, if you want an audiobook and it's ever on sale, or if you have a credit on Audible, definitely go listen to it. I think it's worth it.
I might have to.
Yeah,
I
I
think,
really enjoyed it.
yeah, that certainly sounded like it was, worth a listen for sure, for sure. I
And
I also think it's interesting, like, because I just actually looked up just to see, John, you were talking about, like, the old, like, all that cast members and stuff, and I just wanted to see, like, if Keenan had said anything about it, and it is interesting because there's certainly there seems to be, like, people who didn't get this, like,
mhm.
like, get this treatment or, like, preferential treatment. Certain people got it worse than others, and
Y
so because Keenan missed it somehow. I think he wasn't on when Dan Schneider was on, is my understanding, but
Okay, because I think Drake Bell has not come to the defense of, but I don't think he's ever said anything bad about Dan Schneider, actually. Like
yeah, I noticed that as well in the even in the documentary because he even details, uh, Dan Schneider calling Drake and
mhm,
saying, "Hey, this guy, he's you heard about it, right? He's going,
yeah,
I'm just wondering if you had anything to do with this or, you know,
yeah. Did that
if
involve you or
you yeah, involved you," and, seemed to be pretty supportive of Drake,
and
um,
as
in
I
that
was
moment,
watching
at
that,
least in that moment.
like, I couldn't bel like, it was hard to imagine not telling everybody because like, when he says, like, that courtroom, like you mentioned, was packed for Brian, and it was just, like, on the other side, it was just Drake and his family or whatever, um, I'm like, "Why wouldn't he tell everybody and just get all it like, the defenses?" But I'm like, "Well, wait a minute, if he brought it up and starts telling everybody," I think he mentioned it was, like, right before they shot the pilot of Drake and Josh.
Yeah.
Like, there goes that. They're just gonna be like, "Oh,
Yep.
oh, wow, let's just cancel this then."
Let's shut it down.
So, he's at that age, you're in a rough spot. Like, you don't wanna throw that away,
Yeah.
quote, like,
Well
it like, you're not
yeah.
throwing it away, you're sticking up for yourself, but it's gotta feel that way, where you're like, "I don't wanna ruin this."
I've been fairly heavily invested in, the drama between Josh Peck and Drake Bell over the years because they were friends, and then they didn't like they kinda weren't friends, and it seems to cycle through that every once in a while. There was you can go look up, like, YouTube videos about this. They both say things about each other, like, on different, like, podcasts
I didn't
or
know that,
whatever
really.
they're on.
I didn't realize they had beef.
It's like yeah, there I think it's like I could see, like, both sides of things, but recently, Drake actually released a video that's a short that I caught on TikTok just by purely the algorithm, and it's just Drake Bell being like, "Hey, guys, listen, there's absolutely no reason for you to go, uh, like, say things to Josh about this, like,
Yeah.
basically defending him, and at one point he says, "Just, like, the go easy on him." Like, there's no
Yeah, I think a
you
lot
know,
of people jumped on him, like, "How come you didn't do anything?" And it's like, "What was he supposed to do? He was the same age as Drake." Like,
they're all kids, man, like,
yeah,
you just, like, trying to survive, like,
yeah, and he
what are
didn't
you gonna
know about
do?
any of this stuff when they maybe had their fights or whatever, like, how's he supposed to know?
And
Uh,
obviously, Drake Bell the thing is, though, like, there's no like, I don't find because I was completely on Josh Peck's side for a little while, because I remember the certain things coming out about what
yeah.
had, like, Drake had done.
Yeah, he's
Um,
not had a great track record either.
yeah, because he also too, I think a lot of people need to understand that when something does go through, like, a court system, maybe sometimes, like, if all signs point to, um, this this wasn't, his fault. Okay, so Drake Bell, was contacting a minor,
Mhm.
or, whatever.
Attempting to date or
Yeah,
something, yeah. I mean, in layman's terms, isn't there the phrase, like, hurt people," or something like
right.
that? And
Exactly.
and yeah, so that I did see a lot about that, like, people saying, like, "Hey, like, both can be true. He can have gone through a
Right.
traumatic experience and also
Good
not be a
point.
great person. This doesn't exonerate him from all the crappy things he's done, but it adds a level of understanding of,
That's
like,
a really reasonable take, I think.
yeah, um, and I guess one other person to talk about, I guess, before we kinda maybe wrap up or
Mhm, mhm,
start to, is Amanda Bynes. We
mhm.
brought up the Amanda Show, but yeah,
Amanda Show.
that was
Drake Bell
another
was
one.
on the Amanda Show too, I didn't
Yeah, that's
realize
where
that,
he, like, kinda
actually.
started. On
I didn't make
Nickelodeon.
the connection.
I didn't either. Um, she I remember being, like, same thing, like, focal point of Nickelodeon. Like,
Mhm.
she was, like, the next big thing, and, man, it seems like Dan Schneider was pretty creepy with her. I mean, it sounds like there's a part where she was trying to get emancipated, and she ran away, like, she's still a minor, and, like, disappeared for some hours, and it turns out, like, she was with Dan Schneider or something. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, you're, like, a 40-year-old man, just call her parents, like, what don't do th like, what do you like, just that whole thing is just inappropriate, and they said that, like, I guess he would kinda spend a lot of time with her on set and all these things, and, I mean, you can't sit here and make some accusations. There's no proof that he did anything actually inappropriate, but, I mean, that is inappropriate, though. Like, you shouldn't be becoming friends with these 15-year-olds that are on your shows. Like, it's weird, and you can just see it. Like, he
Yeah,
thinks he's such a cool guy, and, "Oh, look at me. Like, I'm so funny, and everyone likes me." And everyone's just, like, going along with it because 'cause they're like, "Please don't fire me. Like, please don't fire me." But it's sad. I mean, watching her now, it's like, I feel like she had disappeared and then went through some mental health issues and is, it seems like, trying to rebound now.
mm,
Um, I know there's, like, a reel of, like, she's going for her cosmetology license or something, like, just trying to probably have a normal life now. It's like, went through these things, had so many highs of being a movie star, TV star, but at the same time, getting all of this stress and trauma dumped on you has to just, oh my God, it's got to just mess you up like for a while.
for sure. I
But
actually what I remember, like, more vividly was, like, that string of movies that she had, like, when she was, like, coming out of the Nickelodeon phase. Like,
yeah,
there's 3 that I just looked up that I remember very vividly. She's the Man with
yep.
Channing Tatum, which I totally didn't even realize was
Watched
Channing
that
Tatum.
not that long ago.
Yesterday?
Not yesterday, no, but it's like one of
Okay.
Kelsey's favorite
A week ago.
movies.
Okay. And, I mean, the classic scene where they find out that she's a girl, I think happens, like, on the soccer field, I think. I just, for some reason, remember
I
that one
forget.
in particular. Anyway, then there's What a Girl Wants, which I believe she's in, like, London in that
Oh,
movie?
I remember seeing the cover of this all the time. I think I can
Yeah.
picture it in my head, but I never saw it.
American teenager Daphne boards a plane to England to find the father she's never met. And then Big Fat Liar with, Frankie Muniz and Paul Giamatti and
A cl
Sandra Oh.
What a combination.
I know, what a combination is right. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Not Jason Shepard, Frankie Muniz, who has to prove the sleazy Hollywood producer. Oh man, this sounds too close to home.
Oh boy.
Marty Wolf, Paul Giamatti stole his class paper and turned it into a blockbuster hit movie, Big Fat Liar.
Yeah, they were setting her up to be big time. Like you said,
Yeah.
comes out of Nickelodeon having her own show that was super popular to right into being a movie star. Like, I don't know how big those movies were, but to have 3 big movies where you're the main person in it, I mean, that's crazy.
If it if it's big enough to where, like, most people of that generation of our age would remember it if you bring it
Yeah.
up, that's pretty significant.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know if they were actually, like, considered, like,
Oh, yeah.
movies at the time or if they were more like, "Oh, that's just like a teenage movie or something." Like, like, I don't know if they actually got like, traction or if they were just like, it's a random movie, no one's really watching this." And then now people like it. But,
Good question.
yeah, yeah, there's almost too much to go over. A lot of it is visual, I feel like, in
Yeah,
this documentary.
I think, I think we've said enough of the actual details of the documentary
Yeah, I
because
think so.
at this point, there's plenty more where that came from in the
Ugh,
documentary, and,
not in a good way.
yeah, and so you should go watch it if any of this interests you whatsoever.
Yeah, I, 100% recommend this. It's like 4 episodes. Um, and if you ever start to feel bad while watching it, just start dunking on Dan Schneider's haircuts. It makes you feel better while watching it.
That's
It's
so good. Love
it's
that.
about 30 years of just terrible looking. It's just the worst. I don't know what he was doing, but uh yeah, it helps. But it's yeah, it's great. It's nostalgia in the worst way. It's
Mhm.
great nostalgia. You're like, I remember that. And then you're also like, oh, that's not good. So
That's right.
uh
Wah.
yeah.
So that's
Anything
been
else?
another episode of Screened In Podcast,
Ending on a high
and
note.
we didn't cry, so that's a good sign.
There's still
Um,
time.
there's still time. Still got a minute here. Um, that's been another episode of the Screen In Podcast. We are now on YouTube, as you can tell if you're watching this right now, but some of you might be listening to the audio. Just wanted to let you know that you can head over to YouTube, subscribe to us, and we're over there as well. We've got visuals. We're
Yeah.
actually on your screen instead of just in your earbuds.
You can watch us
Um,
now
what's
'cause
that?
so they can watch us now
That's
'cause
right. That's right.
in
Uh, so that's all I got. No, you can find us on the socials, on Instagram. Hit us up there. If you DM us, we'll give you an invite to the Discord where you can give us feedback as well as participate in things like voting on what kind of show we should do next and that type of stuff. So that's it for me. I'm Mike Berger. That's John Artigler. Have a good one,
adios,
everyone.
everybody.